Hello and welcome to today's vlog. In the heart of Denver, you will find a park called Cheeseman Park. A lot of people that go there don't know about its dark past, but today we are about to tell you the story about Denver's dark history. It all started in 1858 when General William Larimer set aside 320 acres for Mount Prospect Cemetery. It just so happened to be in the exact location that now is Cheeseman Park. In the crest of the hill, several plots were reserved for the rich and the most influential citizens. And on the outer edges, it was reserved for the criminals and the poor citizens. And then the middle class would be somewhere in between. As time went on, the outer edge started to really fill up, mainly with all the criminals and all of the poor people. So the town started giving it lots of nicknames, just losing the respect of all of Denver's influential people. So a lot of them decided to be buried somewhere else. They didn't want to be buried in that cemetery anymore. So the cemetery was pretty much left for all of the diseased and the poor and the criminals. When Larimer eventually left Denver, John Wally took over Mount Prospect. So this was around 1866. At this time, there was about 626 bodies buried in the cemetery. But Wally didn't really take care of the property at all. It just became very overgrown. People came in and vandalized it. So a few years later, the government bought it and offered it to the city of Denver, naming it Denver City Cemetery. And then a hospital was built on the southern end. It was referred to as the Pest House. It was where people with smallpox and other contagious diseases were left to quarantine. Most of the people in this hospital were just left there to die and buried in mass graves right behind the hospital. By 1880, the cemetery had just become a huge eyesore. The whole town didn't want anything to do with it. And it just so happened to be in one of the most prestigious, fast-growing parts of the city. So the city decided that it might be a good idea to turn it into Congress Park. So then, family of the people buried in the cemetery were given 90 days to relocate the remains of their family members. The ones who could afford it did just that. But if you remember, the majority of the people that were buried in that cemetery were criminals, vagrants, poor people. So a lot of the families either didn't care or couldn't afford to move their family members and relocate them. So in 1893, the city contracted E.P. McGovern to remove the remains that were unclaimed and just left in the cemetery. In his contract, they stated that he would be paid $1.90 per coffin that he would relocate to the new location. Everything was going well for the first few days. He did just that until he got an idea. He decided that he could make more money. If only he could create more coffins and make it look like there were even more bodies. So he decided to only order child-sized coffins. These coffins were 1 foot by 3.5 feet. So he would just hack up the bodies and make them fit into multiple caskets. He would split up one body in up to 3 child-sized coffins. So while he was doing this, body parts were literally laying everywhere. He had dismembered bodies all over the place. While this was going on, some people decided to come through and loot from the open graves. There was just no respect for the dead. So when Denver Republican got a hold of the story, everyone was horrified and disgusted. They couldn't believe that this was going on. The health commissioner, of course, immediately opened an investigation. Mayor Rogers terminated the contract. And at this point, because there was no one moving the graves, the city decided to put up a temporary wood fence around the cemetery to keep people out. There were still open graves everywhere. It was just a mess. But they still wanted to turn the cemetery into a park. So they began grading and leveling the cemetery to move forward with those plans. They finally completed the park in 1907. So on top of the 320 acres, we have Congress Park, Cheeseman Park, and a large residential area in between. It is currently estimated that there are still about 2,000 bodies that were never relocated or removed from the cemetery that are still underneath these homes and underneath Cheeseman Park. Almost immediately, when they had started to dig up the graves, there was reports of really weird things happening. Even the people that lived in the residences around the cemetery were reporting seeing and hearing sad, confused spirits knocking on their doors and windows and hearing the sounds of moans coming from their graves. To this day, most visitors that go to the park say that they have an unexplained, sad feeling of dread while they visit. Children have been seen playing at the park and then vanishing out of nowhere. There's also reports of strange shadows and misty figures that wander through the park in confusion. It is said that when the moonlight hits the park just right, you can still see the outline of the graves on the ground. Others say that if you lay on the grass, they found it very hard to get up, as if someone was pulling or holding them down. So what do you think? Did you know that there were still over 2,000 unmarked graves underneath Cheeseman Park? Have you been to Cheeseman Park? Did you have any experiences? Do you believe in any of these spooky stories? Ghosts knocking on people's doors, windows, figures vanishing in the night, children playing through the park and then suddenly disappearing? What do you think of this story? Let me know in the comments if you would like to hear more stories like this. Make sure you subscribe and stay tuned for more fun vlogs coming up.